Okay, so I've created a new project using Angular CLI called routing. First, I'm going to generate a few components. So ng gc home for the home page. Another one, not-found. And finally, archive. Okay. Now let's go to app.module. On the top, first I'm going to import the router module. Router module from Angular/router. Next, we need to configure our routes. So here in the imports array, I'm going to call router module.forRoute. Here we pass an array. And in this array, we have our route objects. Each object should have two properties, path and component. So here's our default route, which I'm mapping to home component. Let's duplicate this a few times. The second route is going to be archive. And here we should have two parameters, year and month. And we want to map this to archive component. And finally, the last route, I'm going to use a wildcard. So if we have any other routes, I want to render the not found component. And we don't need the last one. Next, we need to add a router outlet. So let's go to app.html, which is the container for our application. I'm going to delete all this markup and instead add router outlet. Now let's make sure our routes are configured properly. So back in the browser, here we have the home page, beautiful. Let's go to archive with a year and a month. We get the archive page, and let's go to an invalid URL. So we get the not found page, beautiful. Now let's render the list of archives on the home page. So I'm going to go to home.component.ts. Here I'm going to define a field, archives, and set it to an array of objects. Each object should have two properties, year and month. Let's duplicate this, change the months, okay? And then let's go to home.html and render these archives. First, I add a heading here, homepage. Below that, UL. Inside that, we're going to have LI. And here we use ng4 to iterate over our archives. So let archive of archives. Now here we need to add a link. So an anchor. We use interpolation to render the link. And for that, we add archive.year plus a slash and then archive.month. Now here I'm going to use the router link directive, router link. Now, because we need to pass parameters, instead of using this as an attribute and using it as one-time initialization, we need to use the property binding syntax and bind this to an array. The first element is the path, which is /archive. And the subsequent elements are our route parameters. So archive.year and archive.month. Let's test this. So back in the browser, I'm going to go in the home page. Beautiful. We have the list of archives. When I click this, we get to the archive page. Perfect. Next, we need to extract these route parameters and display them on this page. So let's go to archive.component.ts. To get the route parameters, we need to inject activated route here. So private route of type activated route. Now, just one tip here. The first time you use the auto import plugin in a new project, it may not detect the namespace for this type properly. So on the top, you should import this from Angular/router. However, the first time you use this, the auto import plugin may suggest to import this from Angular/router/source. I'm not entirely sure why this happens. Perhaps it's a bug in this plugin. So if that happens, manually change this. And from now on, any type defined in this namespace, you can easily import them with auto import plugin. All right, so we injected this type, activated route. Next, we need to define a couple of fields. Year of type number, same for month. And in ng-on-init, we are going to read the route parameters. Now here, because we don't have a scenario where the user can be on the same page and navigate back and forth with different route parameters, I'm going to use a snapshot. That's easier. So this .route.snapshot.param_map. Now from here, we need to get the year and the month. Now I don't want to repeat this long expression twice, so we can store a reference to this param map in a separate variable with a shorter name. Let's call it params. And then we can call params.getYear and use this to initialize the year field. Now here we have a compilation error because the get method returns a string, but here we have defined year as a number. So as I told you before, we can add a plus here. Now let's duplicate this, change this to month, and this one to month here as well. Or we could use multi-cursor editing. That's faster. Now let's render these fields in our template. So let's go to archive.html. I'm going to delete this, add a heading, archive for, here we add the year, and then the month. Let's test this. Back in the browser. Okay, we have these parameters rendered beautifully. If I change the URL to 2017/2, you can see that's updated here accordingly. And the last step is to add a button and implement programmatic navigation. So here in the template, I'm going to add a button, call it view all, and handle the click event and bind it to the view all method in our component. Let's go to archive component.ts and implement this method. First, we need to inject the router service into the constructor. So private router of type router. And let's import this. You can see the namespace is picked up properly. So it's Angular/router. And finally, let's implement this new method. View all. Here we should call this .router.navigate. And as the first argument, we pass our route parameters array. So here, the first parameter is the path, which I'm going to set to the home page. So note that here we use a leading slash, but when defining our route in app module, we don't use the leading slash, okay? Now, finally, let's test this. So back in the browser, I'm going to click this and we're back on the home page. Beautiful. Now, if you want to have my solution, you can download it from this lecture.